I work for Comcast Cable. I run an API management gateway that handles traffic at the scale of Comcast. So it's not the biggest platform in the world. It's not the smallest. We handle about 43 billion transactions a month. At peak, we handle about 33,000 requests per second. To put that in a little more human perspective, in the time I've talked so far, that's probably about 750,000 transactions. So I do this, well, actually, I don't do this, right? I'm a director. I have a team of people who work for me who do this. It's a pretty small team. We have 6 people both developing the platform and operating the platform. We're a DevOps shop. They also do QA. We do everything in-house. So what I do is I spend a lot of time thinking about, well, how am I going to have this small group of people be really, really effective, right? How am I going to build a culture that enables them to meet our goals and move things forward? And I'm really willing to steal shamelessly from any source available, which is a lot of what the inner source movement is about, right? It's about stealing good ideas from the open source movement and applying them inside of our corporate environments. And there's some things that aren't great about the open source community, and it's also sort of a falsehood to say the open source community, as if that was like one monolithic thing. But there are some really good things, and I think most of us who are looking at inner source initiatives in the industry are really looking for 2 things. We're looking for the pace of innovation that we get out of the open source community. So I mean, we look at obvious projects like Linux or Apache, and they're just gigantic, and they've completely taken over the world. But I look at new technologies like 3D printing, where you've got open source hardware, you've got open source software, and I look at the pace of innovation. I bought one about 9 months ago. It's completely obsolete, right? Because it's moving so fast. Now I can print a new one using my old one, because that's the type of innovation that you get out of these types of communities. The other thing we're looking for is motivation, right? We're never going to have volunteers at our day jobs. That's just not how day jobs work, right? But we can certainly try to build places that people love to come and work and love what they do. So this is the point where we're going to take a little bit of a look at what is culture, and I'll probably do the awful talk stereotype of throwing up a dictionary slide in a moment. But before I do that, I want to talk about why it's important to define culture. I think one of the things that I've heard a lot of VPs do at a lot of the companies I've worked for is use culture as sort of a boogeyman, right? We've got a culture problem. I've heard so many people in meetings say, we don't have an X problem, we have a culture problem. And no one in the room really knew exactly what they were talking about, right? It's like, we have a problem, is what they were really saying. So let's take a look at what is culture. All right, that's probably not what we're looking for here. Let's try again. So this customs ideas and social behavior gives us a much more useful definition, right? Especially focusing in on behavior. Behavior is something as leaders in an organization and just as members of an organization that we can control. But actually, if you look back at that first definition for a minute, that also has a lot to do with how culture works, right? We have this sense of cultivation. We can provide a nutrient-rich environment for culture to grow, for behaviors to grow in, and we can spread those behaviors in the correct sort of nutritious environment, right? And that's true for good and bad behaviors. Now, hopefully, when we're designing an inner source program, we're looking at spreading good behaviors, not bad behaviors. But it's important to keep in mind that if we're not careful, we can have the opposite impact. So I want to share 2 stories of people who have changed enormous organizations through simple behavioral changes. The first story I'll share is Captain David Marquette's story. Now, Captain Marquette was given command of a U.S. Navy submarine, which is a really big deal. It's a really hard job. There's literally lives on the line. And not only was he given command of a submarine, but at the last minute, his admiral sat him down and said, hey, you know that submarine you were going to take over? I've decided to switch up and give you the USS Santa Fe instead. The Santa Fe, for about 9 years prior to his taking it over, had the worst record in the entire fleet. On every metric that the Navy tracks, they had the worst record in the fleet. And he said, okay, I'm up for this challenge. And so he sat down with his officers, his sort of heads of staff, and said, all right, so we've got to turn this ship around. We've got to take this from being the worst performing ship in the fleet, and I want to make it the best performing ship in the fleet. That's my personal challenge. We're going to change this ship. And they started talking about what that would look like, and they started focusing on the behaviors of the crew and how that would change if they succeeded in that. And one of the things that came up in the discussion was, well, people would be proud to work on this ship again, which hasn't been the case for a long time. And so Marquette asked a really smart question and said, well, how would we know they were proud? What would they be doing that would be different because they were proud? And someone said, well, they might buy hats, right? We've all seen people with the Navy hats that have the ship that they serve on, and that's a good idea. Eventually, the discussion led to the idea of the 3-name rule, which is something that they came up with and enforced. And the 3-name rule was essentially, if people were proud to be on the ship, they'd want to greet visitors, and they'd want to greet them with 3 names. They'd greet them with their own name, they'd greet them with the name of the ship, and they'd greet them with the visitor's name. So quick example, someone comes on board and I say, hi, Captain Sparrow, welcome to the USS Black Pearl, I'm Christopher Litsinger, right? Not necessarily in that order, but you want those 3 pieces of information. And when the inspectors came on, and that was really the only initiative that they had time to implement in that between him taking over the ship and their first inspection, inspectors wrote that it was like visiting a brand new ship. That's actually on the written report that was turned in. And Marquette credits that simple rule. And he actually said that only 10% of people on that first visit followed the rule. But if you've ever been through an audit, which is something I've been through, I think a lot of people in the industry have been through, you understand the extent to which properly greeting and being friendly and open to someone can completely change the experience that you go through for that audit or inspection. So another person who made a really amazing cultural change through behavior is a gentleman named Atul Gawande. And Gawande was given the task by the World Health Organization of changing surgical outcomes for hospitals around the world. They wanted to come up with a simple checklist that hospitals could follow pre-surgery across the globe. And this would be hospitals in Western Europe that were well-funded. This would be battlefield condition hospitals. This would be hospitals in villages in India and Africa. They all needed to be able to follow the same checklist. And it had to be a pretty short checklist. Gawande's goal was to fit it on a single page and not by cheating with font sizes, because he wanted hospitals to actually follow it. It wasn't going to do good if they didn't. And one of the most contested items on that checklist is a simple behavioral change, and it's this. Before surgery, everyone who's going to be performing that surgery introduces themselves to each other and explains what their role is going to be in the surgery. And you can imagine how many people were like, oh, there are so many technical things that would be better to put on this checklist. You're taking up valuable space for this sort of touchy-feely, like, let's all get to know each other, kumbaya thing. That doesn't make sense. But Gawande stuck by it. He implemented this change as they were talking about it in his own practices, and he realized that he didn't go a week without that process revealing problems with the surgery before it began. And surgical teams are almost always ad hoc teams, right? We don't experience that much in our industry, but the nurses, if you've ever learned anything about medical scheduling, it's insane, right? Like, it's just a bunch of people who are thrown together to go like save someone's life. And so taking a moment to step back and say, hey, I'm the nurse, it's my job to shout out if I see you like leaving a sponge inside of the wound that you're closing, right? Taking a moment and doing that actually saves human lives. And this has been adopted at hospitals around the world. The checklist has had a huge impact on surgical outcomes. The statistics are truly inspiring. And so, you know, you think about that simple behavioral change, that simple thing that you can do and have a huge impact on a single organization or an entire set of organizations. It's really inspiring. So within our company, we look for opportunities to change behaviors all the time, right? And one thing that happens in our industry a lot that really lends itself well here is the agile life cycle, right? So you have a retro. What went well, what didn't go well? You've got a perfect opportunity to run a 1-sprint experiment on behaviors. And we do that constantly. We say, hey, this isn't working for us. How about if we tried this instead? One example that I like to share is remote work. So we hired our first remote teammate who had the typical remote experience of joining conference calls and someone's talking in the corner kind of quietly, someone's standing next to the microphone and eating potato chips. They're having a hard time getting a word in edgewise to the conversation. Everyone in the room is forgetting they even exist. And they complain about it during a retrospective, sensibly so. And the team really dug into it and thought, well, what can we do? What behaviors can we implement to change your experience and bring the value that we want to get out of you into the organization? And someone proposed a simple rule, and the rule is if one of us is remote, all of us are remote. And we do that to we've done this for about 3 years now. We have almost all of our meetings now by video conference. The technology's there, it works really well. It looks a little goofy when you walk into our office and there's two people having a really intense discussion with each other, sitting side by side, talking into their computers. But we've gotten used to it. In fact, we've had many meetings where we realized, oh, we could have gotten a conference room, right? And it has some sort of accidental benefits as well. Working from home now has almost zero impact for the team because we're so used to dealing with remote meetings. In fact, our team culture now is when you want to work from home for a day, you sign into the Slack channel by about, 10 a.m. engineering hours, and you say WFH, right? And the whole Slack channel is filled with people saying WFH, WFH in the morning, and even people saying WFO because they feel it necessary to specify when they're going to be in the office because we've developed the culture there. And one of the reasons that I know we've built a great culture overall in the team is that in spite of the fact that we've taken away the barriers to working from home, people still choose to come into the office. They want to join the team for lunch. They want to have the conversations that we have in the office. And that's really important to me as a leader in the organization, a sign that we're doing okay. Innovation comes from collaboration, and especially in today's world, you have to be really intentional about collaboration. And so we're constantly looking for opportunities to build new experiences. And there's tons of things in our industry that are common that are great for this. Pair programming is amazing. GitHub and the pull request feature and the way that discussion flows really lends itself well to not only collaboration, but collaboration with the documentation trail, which is like really fun. Another thing that I think that we work on really hard is to make room for off-topic conversations. So we have teams that are almost fully remote at this point, and we found that we need to make intentional space for the sort of collaboration that happens out of water cooler talk and other things that you have when you're working together in an office. So we have ideas like virtual toast that we do once a month where everyone works from home and cracks open a beer at 4 o'clock. We have virtual coffee once a month where everyone just sits together. And the entire intention of that meeting is not to talk about work. It's to talk about what's going on in our lives and build those relationships so that when we are working together, we can collaborate better. And it's had a big impact on the team. Empathy and emotional intelligence are a must in the work that we do. And building space intentionally for doing that and making that space not be let's all go to the beer for mandatory fun after work hours is really important. If you're trying to build an inner source initiative, you want to look for opportunities where you can achieve real symbiosis, right? So if you have a project that not that many people are using that kind of sits off in a corner and does its own thing, and you say, let's build an inner source initiative around this, why is anyone going to be motivated to contribute, right? My team happens to build shared services. We build tools that other developers use. And so this is a great area for us to build the type of collaboration that companies adopting inner source are looking for. And in fact, we do get remote pull requests on a fairly regular basis, more so than most other departments do. And we work hard to find our partners. We find the people who we really enjoy working with, right? Everyone's using our services. They always interact with us. How do I do this? How do I do that? We find the people who we just have that connection with, and we chase after them. What are the things that you want out of this product? Oh, well, how about if we work together to build that? Do you have time to build that into your development cycle? We can definitely help with it. the wording of submit a pull request is sometimes like an insult, right? Like, submit a pull request, we'll get to that, right? But actually collaborating with people is really useful. And we celebrate contributions as well. We have a tradition on the team of buying someone donuts for their first pull request. And we've extended that outside of our own team as well. Whenever anyone remote submits a pull request from another team, we make a big deal of delivering that team donuts in the middle of the day. No one complains when donuts show up unexpectedly. And it doesn't have to be donuts, right? You have to figure out your own way to do it. We talked earlier about that question that David Marquette asked. What would pride look like? And we've asked ourselves that, and we've tried to instill the same sort of pride that you're going to see for the next 2 days here at OSCon. Tons of people who are working on open source projects who have proudly badged their laptop with those projects, right? At some point it occurred to us, hey, we could do the same thing for the projects we're working on at work, right? And so, I mean, not all of those, that's my laptop. Those aren't all inner source initiatives, but they mostly are. And I can tell you, like, I was pretty proud when I put that Code Big sticker on there for the first time, because I've been involved in building that since near the beginning. And again, this is a relatively inexpensive initiative to get things moving along. I want to take a minute to talk about the importance of diversity in our industry. I think this is something that the open source community is really struggling with right now. All sorts of projects are facing this in all sorts of different ways with varying degrees of success. And this is actually an area where the industry has a leg up, because we have more control over the behaviors of people who are employed by our organizations than the open source community does of its volunteers. Right? We can actually draw a line in the sand and say this behavior is unacceptable. You can't do that here. And there's just so much research right now about how productivity is driven by diversity. In 2010, there was a groundbreaking study on collective intelligence, which found that the sort of key ingredient for collective intelligence, maybe counterintuitively, wasn't the individual intelligence of the members of the group, but actually the individual empathy of the members of the group is what drives the ability for a group to solve complex problems. And it turns out that women tend to be more empathetic than men are in our society. Now, you can say that's biological, you can say that's societal, it doesn't matter what the reasons are. The truth is that adding women to a team increases the ability of the team to solve complex problems. And diversity isn't just about women in technology. There's more recent research that talks a lot about how the most productive teams benefit from their diversity because it creates a sense of tension on the team. There's no in-group, right? And when everyone's just a little bit on edge, it has a cognitive difference. It actually changes the way your brain chemistry works. And the outcome of that team is better as a result. Really fascinating research, relatively early findings. I'm interested to see where that goes. And we've got plenty of examples from the industry of counter examples of this, right? Famously cited all the time is the first generation of airbags, which was designed by all-male engineering teams by measuring their own averages and accidentally killing women and children in the first generation of airbags, which is probably not what they were intending to do. When health tracking apps first came out, they somehow missed one of the most tracked statistics of someone's health for the past, several thousand years, which is a woman's menstrual cycle. Something that just didn't get added to those applications. And I'm pretty sure if they had had a more gender diverse development team, someone might have said, hey, you know what we need? We need to be able to check the date of my last period, but they didn't. All right, so moving down from that soapbox, a couple people have already talked about hackathons as a really powerful tool. The open source community uses that all the time. And tons of companies have hack days, hack weekends, whatever sort of traditions they can implement to drag people together working on common problems and volunteering to work on problems that interest them. One of the things that brought me to Comcast was when I sat down for my interview with the hiring manager who said, oh yeah, we do lab week 3 times a year. And my jaw dropped because I had spent so much time trying to sell this to VPs in previous organizations. This is a really great opportunity to break down barriers in organizations. So if you've got a real dev-ops split between those teams, getting those teams to work together to solve some of the problems that they're facing, or if you have a dev QA split, again, finding intentional projects that can bring those teams together for a little bit of time to jump out of their comfort zone and work on something different can have a tremendous impact on an organization. And in fact, my home project, CodeBig, started as a lab week project. So tons of stuff there. And once you have that experimental cycle going, you can continue to encourage that and to create this psychological safety that teams need to be productive, right? So we talk a lot in the industry about the importance of blameless postmortems or after action reviews and how they create that sense of psychological safety, and they can really improve the productivity of organizations, and it's very important to do that. But we can also look for other things to do. I've seen teams that have a fail grail that they pass around. We can actually go out of our way to celebrate failed projects. I'm always really inspired by Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, who talks about her father inspiring her to become an entrepreneur by continually asking her as she grew up, tell me one thing that you failed at. And I just think that's an awesome attitude, right? Something that both as a parent and as a leader in the industry, something I strive to do. We also threaten people to open source their projects, right? As much as possible, for all of the reasons that we were talking about before, but also because if something's not if something's not key intellectual property that's driving value to our customers, we're not benefiting from it. All we're doing is investing in it continually, right? We're paying down technical debt on projects that have nothing to do with our revenue stream instead of releasing them into the community where we can benefit from other people developing features we didn't even know we needed yet. And so within our group, we continually look for opportunities to open source the projects that we have. Now, it's important to note that we don't actually start out with the assumption that we must open source a given project. So instead, we get to a point of completion, and then we have the discussion about whether or not a particular project makes sense to open source. So to talk about two different projects and point out the importance of the difference, we're wrapping up work on DNS as a service platform that helps us manage the second largest DNS database in the world at the scale we have. And that's a project that we believe we're going to be able to open source. We're going through the process now. No problem. We built the tool for ourselves. It solved the problem for Comcast. And at the end of it, we said, this seems open sourceable. Let's open source it. In building a similar platform for developers to use, which was a database as a service platform, at some point we made a decision to use a commercial platform instead of an open source database as the back end for it. And we realized when we made that choice that it was going to make it difficult, if not impossible, to open source it, but it was the right choice for the project, so it was the choice we made. And in fact, we weren't able to open source it, which was fine. We do also look for good opportunities to do pure open source development. Comcast was looking to develop a replacement for the speed test app that all of us are familiar with. We realized really quickly that one of the problems that everyone has with a speed test application is trust. No one believes that they're actually getting good data out of it. And so it was really important to us to build an in-browser JavaScript application that was capable of delivering good metrics of the performance of your network bandwidth. So we partnered with Princeton University. We did a hackathon there. We built this from the ground up to be open source, released it as open source. You can check it out. And having those opportunities is definitely an important part of what drives our team. So those are some of the things that we do. My mom's a librarian, and this is her slide, right? We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. These are some of the inspirations that I've had in putting together the talk. So if you want to learn more, or if you want to find something to talk about with me during the hallway track, these are some good introductions. I'll post this to Twitter with some appropriate hashtaggery at some point today. So I want to finish with this thought. We have a culture problem in our industry, and that culture problem is blaming things on culture problems, right? If you really want to create a beautiful culture in your organization, you need to identify the behaviors that matter to drive your organization to the culture that you want to create, and you need to work on creating those behaviors. Culture is too big. No one can create it. Behaviors are something we can all work on. That's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you'd step over here, maybe unplug your computer so the next person can come up. Oh, it's time for break. Oh, break. That's awesome, but I'm still going to talk to you for a minute before we go on break. So so you made some real progress at Comcast, and congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What kind of the pushback factor is interesting to me. So you had some good air cover to get that far.
We did. I work in the office of the chief software architect, and he has a really good reputation within the company. And we're a really small group. We're only, his entire organization is less than 50 people. And we're working on about 6 or so different software projects at the moment. So in spite of being a small part in a huge organization, having John as a boss doesn't hurt for anyone.
Sure.
Right?
So one of the things I've noticed, and I don't know if the pattern community's talked about this yet, but the idea of needing a horizontal structure for it to live in, rather than trying to influence the company from a vertical structure, is an interesting one to me. Sounds like he's recognized across the company as a.
He is, and the way we do actually now have an open source organization, which also works on our inner source efforts as well. But the way we've traditionally done this is just by trying to be a beacon of excellence within the company, trying to demonstrate the value that we're able to create with small teams, having a huge impact and operating at a huge scale with relatively small people, and going out and sharing talks like this within the company about, hey, here's how we do what we do.
Cool. Does anybody in the audience have something that came up for them listening to him? Anybody have any questions? No? Yeah, there's one.
And so you're talking about your buying donuts. Is that on successful pull requests or just whenever they just
So any pull within the team, I mean, I don't know that we have a pull request that isn't successful eventually because we're all working on features that we need. But when external contributions are made, we provide donuts no matter what. Now that might be hackable, right? It hasn't been exploited yet, but I suppose it could be. But we've provided it whether we end up implementing that feature or not.
Yep.
How can we possibly apply that to a larger kind of audience? Because what's the kind of pull request rating in terms of how many do you get versus perhaps
Yes, selecting your extrinsic rewards is an art form all by itself, right?
Yeah, it certainly is. And I mean, Comcast is a huge organization. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 5 digits worth of developers who could potentially make pull requests against our repo. So at some point, we may have to back away, right? That's a problem I would love to have. We're not there yet, right?
So we thought about giving beer at one point, and then we realized we were being culturally insensitive because we had all of these, Hindus that didn't drink beer, right? It's really hard to pick and find something that will scale and that you can continue, because there'll come a time when they have to make that hard decision, like, oh God, is it the end of the donut, right?
I mean, we've had to make special efforts to find vegan donuts and
sure.
sugar-free donuts and other sort of, speaking of cultural sensitivity, those are fun challenges when they come up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the later topic.
But you're right that there's a scaling problem with high quality extrinsic rewards that feel like a personal service. There's definitely a scaling problem. So I think later in the day we might hear something about that again from Salona and the tool that she's going to talk about. True? Yeah, great.
Maybe
Okay.
my next talk will be on the infinite scalability of donuts. Now there's a good there's a good technical challenge I should go and
Yeah,
solve.
hot tip, don't use any pictures of Homer Simpson because Fox
Yeah.
will come after you.